A few years ago, my wife Anna and I took our boys to see the band Imagine Dragons. And it's one of their favorite bands, and I hadn't even realized how many songs of theirs I actually knew, and they knew, it felt like, all of their lyrics. And it was so much fun to go to a concert and just to watch your kids singing their hearts out to music that they love. And somewhere in the middle of the concert, between two songs, the lead singer, Dan Reynolds, began talking about a dark period in his life, about depression and about difficulty, about wondering how he was going to make it through that really dark period in his life. And then he said, "Do you want to know what helped me through it all? There's one thing that helped me get through everything." And standing sort of behind my kids in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is, perhaps you might have realized, decidedly not Jewish, I had really one thought, which was, please don't say Jesus, please don't say Jesus, please don't say Jesus. Right? And he did not say that. He did say, find someone to talk to. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's a message I can get behind. He added, not everyone can afford a therapist or therapy, but no one gets through life alone. Find someone to talk to. And then the music started back again, and the boys went back to singing, and 40,000 big people started singing too, and the concert moved on. And I found myself so appreciative of what he had said to his fans. Find someone to talk to. It's advice that I've given to 1,000 people, just never to tens of thousands of people multiplied by hundreds of sold-out concerts across the globe. Now, as we've heard today, this Shabbat has a unique and special name. It is called Shabbat Nachamu, and we sung about it earlier. And it comes every year on the Shabbat and the days after Tisha B'Av. And earlier this week, we read from the book of Lamentations, and we remembered the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the long chain of losses that have shaped Jewish memory ever since. And then the calendar turns. Not because the grief is over, but because grief cannot be the last word. And so Isaiah opens with the words, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, comfort my people. These words are so central that they give this entire Shabbat its name. But I've always been struck by what Isaiah doesn't say, right? God doesn't say, I will comfort my people. Isaiah says, comfort them. And somehow consolation has been entrusted not to God alone, but to human beings. We're asked to become the voice of God. And then just a few verses later, Isaiah says something that's even more curious. He says, Dabru al lev Yerushalayim. Speak upon the heart of Jerusalem. Now, it's an unusual expression because it mirrors a verse in actually this week's Torah portion where we hear the same words again, very similar again. V'hayu hadevarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha. These words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. That same phrase, al lev, in Isaiah, upon your heart, and al levavecha in Deuteronomy, on your heart, upon your heart. If comforting another person were simply a matter of saying the right thing, Isaiah likely wouldn't have used the expression upon the heart. But anyone who has ever loved another human being perhaps knows better. Because reaching another person's heart is never as simple as saying just the right thing. Okay? Well, we spend a surprising amount of our lives translating ourselves. Sometimes people ask, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, how are you doing? And the response is, I'm good. You both know that that's not the whole answer. But before we answer, we decide how much we're going to share. Can this person or this room bear the complicated version? Will this person understand? And so we translate all the time, with friends and with family, at work, in conversations about Israel or politics, about grief, about fear. Translation isn't dishonesty. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's survival. And it also has a cost, because we think the room cannot bear complexity. So we often simplify ourselves. I'm good. And after a while, we begin translating not only for the people in front of us, people who aren't even there. Sometimes we rehearse conversations that haven't even happened. We defend ourselves against judgments that no one has even made. And sometimes that translation of ourselves also starts to shape the relationships, which is why all of that translating, which feels sometimes so social, can also help us feel or make us feel so alone. And it's also why comforting another person is so difficult, because we rarely meet another person's unfiltered heart. Every conversation begins with translation of some sort. Which brings me to the Shema. The Shema comes from this week's Torah portion, Va'etchanan, as we also heard earlier before. And before we say the words, we cover our eyes. And I had the opportunity this evening to actually be holding my nephew, who was covering his eyes so beautifully during the Shema. And I've always loved that gesture, because for one sentence, we stop looking. We stop measuring the room. We stop wondering how we're being seen. For one sentence, we simply listen. And perhaps I want to suggest that comfort begins there. Not with finding the perfect words, but by becoming fully present to another person. Years ago, the Kotzker Rebbe asked why the Torah always says, al levavecha, upon your heart. Why not levavecha, in your heart? And his answer has become a favorite teaching of mine. He says, because hearts are not always open, so the words rest on top. They wait. And I suspect every person here knows exactly what he means. Think about moments in life when someone you love is grieving. You walk into a hospital room, or maybe it's into a house that's sitting Shiva. You answer the phone after terrible news and almost immediately discover that you don't necessarily know exactly what to say. There are no words that can change the diagnosis. No words that can undo the death. No words that can erase fear or loneliness or heartbreak. And so we say and translate ordinary things. I'm here. I love you. You're not alone. I'm praying for you. We'll get through today. To someone. And if we're honest, many of us leave those moments wondering whether any of it actually mattered. Whether we said enough, whether we said the right thing. And perhaps that is exactly what Isaiah understood. The people of Jerusalem were not ready to be comforted necessarily. Their city had been destroyed. The losses were still fresh. And Isaiah does not try to explain suffering. He does not rush people through their grief. He simply says, "Comfort my people. Speak upon their heart." Not because they will immediately take away the pain, but because not because they'll be instantly understood, but because love has a way, and presence has a way of just landing upon the heart. And sometimes, days later, or months later, or years later, a sentence returns not because it solved the pain, but because someone loved us enough to speak when silence would have been a lot easier. Perhaps that is what the Torah means when it tells us to place the words upon our hearts. Because not every word enters that moment in the same way. Sometimes we need to wait patiently, faithfully, until the heart is ready. And that makes me think differently about the words from the concert, "Find someone to talk to." At first, I thought it was just great advice for a huge concert of 40,000 people. But I also think it's something more. It's a reminder that God has given us the responsibility to comfort each other. We bring comfort to the world through the way that we parent, through the way that we are a friend, or a teacher, or a neighbor, through visits and phone calls and a meal left on a front porch, a hand held in silence, a sentence spoken with love. We may not know which of our words another person carries for years. We don't get to know that. And our responsibility is not to guarantee that our words will heal. Our responsibility is simply to keep showing up, to keep listening, to keep speaking, to keep loving, trusting that what is offered faithfully in love may one day find its way from upon the heart to within the heart. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, comfort my people. That is our work. Shabbat Shalom.